I know, I've been sitting on the couch more than anything else lately. I know you see me on the floor and you're like, Mommy, you feeling better? Hi, welcome to another video. So I have been sick for the majority of this week, but I'm feeling a little better today, and I have been wanting to do this video since last night, which is when I finished one of the books that I'm going to talk about. But today's video is going to be about historical fantasy. Now, I am by no means an expert in this genre because I'm pretty sure that the only two books that I've read in the historical fantasy genre are the two books that I'm about to mention. But I want to talk about my own opinion and how I think that there's a right way to do it and there is a wrong way to do it. Okay, so the two books that I'm going to be talking about are vastly different. Although they are technically both classified as historical fantasy, they are both very different, so I'm not really going to be comparing them, but rather I'm going to talk about the elements of a story that were used well in one and not so well in another. So the first book is Babel by R.F. Kuang, which many of you may already know my opinion on this book because I did a whole review on it, and if you want to check that out, go ahead and check it out. I'll put the link down in the description for it. Shut up, phone. Hold on, let me silence that because that's gonna bother me. Anyways, Babel is a historical fantasy book. It is much more dark academia though, and it is set in the British Chinese colonial time of the 1830s, basically. And you follow a main character, a young boy, Robin, who is kind of manipulated into becoming useful for Britain, and he has this whole identity crisis of, you know, being English, being Chinese. The magical elements in this, the elements that make it a fantasy, is that languages play a big part. It's the use of translation, the use of two languages that are very heavily studied and researched before they are then inscribed on a piece of iron. I think it was iron, some kind of metal bar, and then that is used to enhance different items of everyday life, like cars or a plate, even to keep the plate warm, or machinery, even clothing or buildings or things like that. So the magic kind of fit in with the historical aspect of this story. Like, it has a very European feel to it, and of course it also played a lot into the author's messaging of this book, which, you know, the primary focus of this book was its message. The second book I'm going to talk about is The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi by S.A. Chakraborty, which I literally finished last night, and which is why I was like, I need to talk about how there's a difference, and there is one way that it's well done and one way that it's not well done. So The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi, this book is also a historical fantasy, and it is set in the 12th century, primarily Islamic society. There's actually a map too in here, and it focuses mostly on the society that lives in like the northwestern Indian Sea area, so like probably around here. Is that what I'm thinking? Around here. Like this area. It's a very pretty map. And the magic in this book, the fantastical side, is lore and legends and mythical creatures that are related to the culture of Islam. The main messaging of this book is its story. It's the adventure, it's the action, and this character that is epic and legendary and etc. But point is that these two books are vastly different, okay? They're not, you can't compare them because they're just not the same. But what I do want to point out is that this one is an adventure story, right? It's a big fantastical pirate adventure on the seas and different monsters and mythical creatures. This one is a dark academia that's set mostly in schools and about languages and things like that. Babel is a lot bigger and a lot thicker than Amina al-Serafi. The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi is 470 pages. I haven't checked Babel, but Babel is almost 100 pages longer. It is 542 pages. And with the amount that happens in Babel, I don't think that page count is justified at all. If anything, I feel like The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi should have been longer than Babel. But so let's talk about which one I think did not quite fulfill the role of a historical fantasy. Again, remember that I am not an expert in the genre by any means whatsoever, but I do feel like the big downfall of one of the books here is that it doesn't feel like a fantasy. And that would be Babel. I mean, again, if you've seen my review of this, you'll know that I do not think that this book is in any way a great book. I gave it 2 stars. I did not like it. I thought that it was extremely boring. And honestly, whoever thought that this book should be considered a fantasy, I want to punch them in the throat. Because yes, there's a magical element in this with languages and metal bars and how that enhances things, but my goodness, nothing happens. Nothing happens in this book. And that's really where I want to go into why one of these did a much better job of being a historical fantasy and the other one did not. This one did wonderfully. So I can't compare the stories because they're different, but I am gonna say that the reason I feel like historical fantasy has to be different from historical fiction, because Babel I think would have done great as a historical fiction book if it hadn't been considered for fantasy, because fantasies are supposed to be stories. They're supposed to take you somewhere else, right? Now, historical fantasy, it's still supposed to have some kind of historical basis, right? Something that it draws upon from our real life. And I think that that is important because I know that a lot of people don't really read into our history. Hell, I know people around me in my life who don't understand that the British Empire was one of the first ones to do concentration camps when they colonized India. It wasn't the Nazis who invented that, okay? But some people don't know that because some people don't know their own world history, which is sad and it's horrible. And I understand that translating our history through a different medium or through a different genre, such as fantasy, is a great way to try and get people more invested in our history and more curious about it. And that's wonderful. But you want to make sure that if you are putting it in a different genre, then you have to kind of fit what that genre does, which is to transport a reader, to make them feel like it's fantastical, like it is something to be in awe of. I was not in awe of this. This was boring. Nothing happened. And there could have been so much that could have happened in this. And the reason that this failed as opposed to this is because R.F. Kuang focused too much on her messaging. Now, again, history is bleak and it's not going to be happy, and it's good to inform people about, you know, how terrible our history is. And Babel especially really delves into the horrors of colonization, right? And the way that it alienates people and it rips away their culture and it makes them feel lesser than others. Amina al-Serafi also had those topics brought up, but it did not overshadow the story that was being told. And that is where I think this book is a lot stronger on the historical fantasy side, because instead of focusing so much on the historical side, right, it actually focused more on the fantastical side, all while still having those pieces of history have an impact on the characters and on the story and on the adventures that happened. So yeah, that's mainly what I want to say, because I'm a huge fan of history. I am. I think that it's extremely important to know about it and especially learn from it. Okay, that's the reason history exists. It's so that we fucking learn from our past, from our mistakes, so that we don't make them again. But if you're gonna put it into a format for readers who like fantasy, you have to make it a good story. You have to make it something that is gripping, that is going to make the reader invested not just in the fact that everything is horrific and horrible. And I get that that's what R.F. Kuang does, but I feel like her biggest weakness is that she's so invested in wanting to make the readers, you know, feel the pain and the horrors of it, that she forgets to give it a good story, that she forgets to give it something with more substance. I mean, even as a historical fiction, I think this book would have failed as well for me, because you'd need to make it something that I want to read. I don't know, like it's the characters in Babel were just so dull and void, and did nothing ever. Again, 500 and some odd pages of nothing happening. And even the people who I know enjoyed this more than I did, they'll still tell me, yeah, you're right, nothing really happened until the last like 20% of the book. And I'm like, that does not, to me, that does not justify everything. Like, just because the last 20% something happened doesn't mean that this book is good. Like, it does not justify that. I'm sorry, it just can't. But Amina al-Serafi, it portrayed those elements. I mean, I don't know anything about Islamic culture or history, to be completely honest. Like, I have a degree in art history, and so I took a lot of various classes on different cultures and their histories, but I'll admit, Islamic history, not something I know a whole lot about. And I'll say, The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi really got me interested, because not only with the fantastical side of things, where it added like the jinn and other magical creatures and monsters that apparently are in the legends and lores of this culture, but also the fact that, like, when they're mentioned in here, those are things, legends and lores, that just aren't really believed in widely anymore in the 12th century. So at the point we're in the story, many people are, they believe in God, but there's still a separation, right? There's the Judeo-Christian wars that are happening, I forget what it's called, for some reason I keep forgetting it, but the Europeans, basically, that are mass murdering Islamic people, and that gets brought up. And there's also the side of like, well, what was feminine culture like in this society too? Because Amina al-Serafi is a female captain of a ship, but apparently she's very much against the grain. So it spiked my curiosity of this culture, of this history. And it, you know, the author, she put notes at the end where she thanked all the people who helped her get the right research to do this. She added some further reading for anyone who's interested. And honestly, I want to read more of it. So clearly, like, she did research on making this historically accurate, all while providing us with an amazing story. Honestly, I loved a lot of what I read, whereas this felt like a textbook. And when I'm reading fantasy, or honestly anything, any kind of story, I don't want to read a textbook. I want to read a story. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. Those are my opinions on it. I don't know how you feel about it. I know that The Adventures of Amina al-Serafi just came out, basically, and I had the luck and opportunity to read it. Are you good, dog? Sorry, Yuna has been hyper this morning. And now Babe is hyper too. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I'm sorry I'm not a little more upbeat. I am getting over some sickies, but I'm curious what you think. Have you read other historical fantasy books too? Because I don't think that I have, other than those two. Maybe I have, I don't know. Put it down in the comments if you've read other ones. The dogs are getting really excited, so I'm gonna have to leave you guys now. Bye! As they were a year ago, but all will be okay. I move on each and every day. The past is where it stays, way back a year ago.